The news ticker flashed. Chinese Navy conducts live fire drills near Guam. The words scrolled across the screen, urgent and surreal, as if plucked from a work of speculative fiction rather than a real-world broadcast. Once this would have been unthinkable, now it's reality. The world outside seemed quieter, as if holding its breath, while living rooms across the country filled with a new sense of uncertainty. On screens across America, analysts struggled to explain how China, once isolated and poor, now challenges the US in its own backyard. The questions were urgent, the answers elusive. For generations, Americans believed in their nation's unchallenged dominance. The idea that another power could rival the United States seemed almost impossible, a distant worry from another era. The idea of a peer competitor was a relic of the Cold War, a memory tucked away with black and white footage and old headlines. Yet, the headline revealed a new world order, one built over decades, often unnoticed. The world had shifted quietly as economies grew and alliances changed. This isn't a story of conquest, but of unintended consequences. The rise of a new power was not the result of a single battle, but of countless choices and overlooked moments. US leaders, hoping to guide China toward democracy and capitalism, instead paved the way for a powerful rival. Their intentions were optimistic, but the outcomes were far more complex. They saw economic opportunity, not a future adversary. Trade and investment promised prosperity, not the seeds of competition. But the path led elsewhere. The future, once so certain, became clouded with new risks and unexpected turns. This essay traces the key moments and decisions that fueled China's rise. Each step, each handshake, each policy shift added another layer to the story. From Nixon's handshake with Mao to sweeping trade deals, we'll explore how America's efforts to shape the world created its greatest competitor. The journey is filled with ambition, hope, and miscalculation. This is a story of ambition, risk, and the unpredictable results of global leadership. It's a reminder that history is rarely straightforward, and the consequences of our choices can echo for generations. The headline is not the beginning, but the result of that journey, a journey that continues to shape our world today. The story begins with a diplomatic gamble, a move that would alter the course of history in ways few could have predicted at the time. In 1972, President Nixon made a historic journey to Beijing, shaking hands with Chairman Mao Zedong. This moment was more than just a meeting. It was a symbol of two worlds colliding after decades of silence. China, at that time, was isolated and impoverished, still reeling from the chaos and devastation of the Cultural Revolution. Its people faced hardship, and the nation was largely cut off from the rest of the world. For the United States, Nixon's visit was a calculated Cold War strategy, an attempt to drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union, the two great communist powers. At the time, no one imagined China as a future superpower. It was seen as a pawn on the global chessboard, not a major player in its own right. The goal was simple: end China's isolation and use it as leverage against the Soviets, not to help China rise, but to contain communism. Yet this opening gave China something invaluable: global legitimacy. It set the stage for economic ties, trade, and future cooperation. Nixon's visit cracked open the door, allowing Western capital, technology, and new ideas to flow into China for the first time in decades. In hindsight, it was the first domino to fall, intended to pressure the Soviets, but ultimately, it set off a chain reaction that would change the world order. US leaders believed they were containing communism, not realizing they were planting the seeds of a new global rival and economic powerhouse. The visit succeeded in its immediate goal, but its true legacy was far greater, reshaping international relations for generations. It marked the beginning of China's integration into the global system, opening doors to trade, investment, and diplomatic engagement. The world's power dynamics began to shift slowly but surely, even if few realized the magnitude of what had begun. Nixon's handshake with Mao was more than a photo op. It was a turning point that would echo through history. The consequences of that visit would reverberate for decades, shaping the rise of modern China and the world we know today. The next step in the evolving relationship was economic, granting China most favored nation trading status in 1980, a pivotal decision that would reshape global commerce for decades to come. This move opened the vast US market to a flood of Chinese goods, fueling China's rapid modernization and industrial growth at an unprecedented scale. American policymakers hoped that economic engagement would not only boost trade, but also spark political reform within China, encouraging openness and liberalization. American consumers benefited from a wave of cheap products, while China gained access to the world's largest and most lucrative market, setting the stage for explosive growth. US leaders believed that as China's middle class expanded, it would naturally demand more democracy and personal freedoms, following the pattern seen in other nations. Instead, the policy supercharged China's economy, transforming it into a global manufacturing powerhouse, almost overnight. Foreign investment poured in, factories multiplied across the landscape, and technological know-how transferred rapidly, accelerating China's rise. Meanwhile, American manufacturing jobs vanished as companies shifted production overseas, chasing lower costs and higher profits in China. The Rust Belt was born, and US workers paid the price, as entire communities faced economic decline and uncertainty. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party embraced elements of capitalism, but without loosening its authoritarian grip on power or society. The new wealth and prosperity only strengthened the party's control, rather than fostering democracy as many in the West had hoped. The US inadvertently taught China how to become the world's factory, unintentionally building up a powerful economic competitor. The so-called economic win-win came with a hidden cost. As American industries declined and trade deficits soared, the hope for political change gradually faded as China's economic and geopolitical power continued to grow, challenging US influence. In the pursuit of shared prosperity, the seeds of a new rivalry were quietly sown, setting the stage for a complex and competitive future. China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 was transformative. The US believed WTO membership would bind China to global rules and open its markets. President Clinton promised it would lead to reform and opportunity for American businesses. But China used the rules to its advantage, protecting its industries and demanding technology transfers. The expected surge of US exports never materialized. Instead, Chinese imports flooded America. The China shock wiped out millions of US manufacturing jobs. China's economy exploded, lifting hundreds of millions from poverty. WTO membership gave China the tools to build an economic powerhouse on its own terms. The global balance of power shifted. The US hoped to shape China's future, but China rewrote the rules. The world's economic center of gravity moved east. As jobs moved to China, so did technology. US companies, eager for market access, shared designs and know-how with Chinese partners. Joint ventures became channels for technology transfer. American firms thought they could stay ahead through innovation, but Chinese companies learned fast. Many partnerships ended with Chinese firms becoming direct competitors. Industrial espionage and cyber theft accelerated the process. US officials called it the greatest transfer of wealth in history. China closed the tech gap rapidly, becoming a leader in fields like AI and telecom. The US hoped to spread its values. Instead, it exported its technological edge. China emerged as a formidable tech rival. The blueprint for dominance was handed over, often unwittingly. The 2008 financial crisis changed everything. As the US economy faltered, China's state-led model looked resilient. China launched massive stimulus projects while the West struggled. The crisis shattered faith in American economic leadership. China gained confidence, questioning the Western model and promoting its own. Financially, the US became dependent on China, which held trillions in US debt. The balance of power shifted. America's superpower status looked vulnerable. China used its reserves to fund global initiatives, like the Belt and Road. The crisis accelerated China's rise and exposed America's decline. The world was no longer unipolar. Flush with cash, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious plan to connect continents with infrastructure. Billions flowed into ports, railways, and roads across Asia, Africa, and Europe. For many nations, China became the partner of choice, but loans often led to debt traps, giving China control over strategic assets. China expanded its influence in global institutions, placing officials in key roles and creating new ones like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The strategy reshaped the world order, not through force, but through economic power. While the US focused elsewhere, China built relationships and secured resources. The rules of global commerce and diplomacy began to change. The US-led system faced a direct challenge. Beijing's vision for the world was taking shape. For decades, Washington believed engagement would make China freer and more like the West. By the 2010s, it was clear. China was building a powerful authoritarian state. In the South China Sea, China militarized artificial islands, challenging US dominance. Chinese tech firms became global leaders, while the state built a vast surveillance apparatus. The Made in China 2025 plan aimed to dominate future industries. The US shifted from partnership to rivalry, launching a trade war and restricting Chinese tech. The bipartisan consensus on engagement collapsed. America realized it had created a peer competitor, not a partner. China's vision for the future clashed with American interests and values. The handshake of 1972 became a standoff. The accidental superpower was now America's greatest challenge. The era of cooperation was over. Today, in 2026, the world is fundamentally changed. The era of unchallenged US dominance is over. Great power competition has returned. Decades of engagement, meant to foster democracy, instead empowered a rival. China fused market economics with authoritarian control, creating a new model. Access to US markets and technology strengthened the party, not weakened it. The world is now bipolar. Two superpowers, two visions. The rivalry is military, economic, technological, and ideological. Global supply chains and the internet are now battlegrounds. The story of America's accidental creation of a superpower is a cautionary tale. Good intentions had unforeseen world-changing consequences. Understanding this history is key to navigating the future. The world has been remade, and the challenge is just beginning.